I'm seeing messages come in.
Good afternoon, morning, evening, everyone.
Hi.
My name's Anna Robb, and this is Matthew and Gareth. And I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction to the three of us for those who were not with us yesterday, just so you know who we are and what we do. Gareth is the one wearing the maroon shirt, and Matthew is the one in the middle for me in the blue shirt, and I'm the female of the group.
I'm the bald guy.
The bald guy. Actually, there's a good descriptive for you. All right, so just a little bit about us before we get started on showstops. Gareth works as an international show caller, production stage manager, and show director. He has a company called QTQ Limited, and in 2019, he did 60 shows in 17 countries with his team. And some of his own credits include the 30th SEA Games that was just held in the Philippines just before Christmas, the Special Olympics in 2019, the Dubai World Cup ceremonies 2017 and 18, Saudi Arabia National Day 2017 to 2019, opening and closing ceremonies of the first European Games in Baku 2015, lots of ceremonies, Dubai's National Days, number 43 and 44, the grand openings of Studio City, the Parisian, MGM, casinos in Macau, Clusters of Light in UAE and Egypt, and he was the stage manager for a stage manager of the London 2000 Olympic and Paralympic ceremonies.
Yeah, there were 30 of us, just one.
What's that?
There were 30 of us to just one.
Yeah, there's lots of you. And also been working in educational training for over 12 years. In fact, all of us are involved in education as well as actually stage managing. So that is Gareth. Matthew Stern, who's currently in New York. I forgot to say Gareth's in the UK right now, and I'm in Australia. Matthew has worked on over 20 Broadway productions, including Finding Neverland, On the Town, Dr. Zhivago, Sideshow, Spider-Man, The Little Mermaid, Wicked, Phantom of the Opera, all the big ones, and The Full Monty. He's done plays on Broadway such as Death of a Salesman with Philip Seymour Hoffman, Enchanted April with Molly Ringwald, and the tours of John Lithgow's one-man show Stories by Heart and Billy Crystal's 700 Sundays. Other national tours include Greece, Les Mis, An Evening with Patti LuPone and Mandy Patinkin, as well as Mandy Patinkin's solo concerts, Dress Casual and Diaries. Special events he's worked on is the Radio City Christmas Spectacular, which I still have never seen and I'd love to, Blue Man Group at the Hollywood Bowl, and the Lord of the Rings Symphony concerts. Matthew has also worked for numerous corporate clients such as Google, Samsung, Facebook, Lenovo, Lexus, Volkswagen, McDonald's, and many pharma companies. He's also on the board of directors of the Stage Managers Association of the USA, a proud AEA member, and the founder of the Broadway Stage Management Symposium. Long list of credentials for Matthew. For me, briefly, my history as a production stage manager and a producer in Asia Pacific. I've worked in America, Africa, Middle East, and Europe. I've worked for companies such as Cirque du Soleil, Franco Dragone Entertainment Group, Christie Digital Systems, and the Sydney Opera House. I've worked on concerts, arena events, corporate events, musical theatre, plays, all of the genres of entertainment. And I'm also the co-founder and managing director of Theatre Art Life, which is an online platform for industry professionals. And I also teach at Hong Kong University cross-cultural communication and entertainment. So that's a bit about me. And thank you all for joining us from all around the globe. We're really happy to have you here today. And if you've joined us again from yesterday, that's wonderful as well. We love to have you back. Just so you know, I know a lot of you have already been commenting on the right. You feel free to ask any questions on the notes here, and we'll answer them as we go. That's the best way for us to keep the ball rolling. Matthew, you got your microphone on? I can't hear you. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I do now. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're here to talk about showstops. We're going to start with preparing for show stops and contingency plans. And I'm going to throw it over perhaps to start with Gareth, who has some interesting stories on ceremonies and contingency plans for ceremonies, a big launch, event launches.
Nothing ever goes wrong, ever.
No.
I think, as I originally started my career, was in theatre, which Matt will talk more about. And certainly in theatre, we have a lot of planning on what could go wrong. And quite often the default is to, well, you can stop. The big difference in ceremonies, Olympic ceremonies, opening ceremonies, is that stopping really is a final resort, because of the fact that you are broadcast live around the world. And if you've got an audience of hundreds and millions of people, stopping the show really is not ideal. So we need to plan in detail to make sure that stopping doesn't happen. And pretty much like in any kind of show, we look at the worst case scenario. It becomes the most depressing document to the creative team, and it is a complete list of every single thing that we identify in rehearsals of which can go wrong. And fundamentally, automation's normally your one sticking point, particularly because in a big ceremony, these automation systems are temporary. It's extraordinary what they do. Because they're temporary systems, there is a chance of things going wrong. So we plan for every single eventuality. And what do we plan? Well, basically, we have to plan how we get out of a situation. So, for example, if we're looking at a show with a major piece of automation, that piece can stop at any point. Let's say it's moving for 2 minutes. It could be a huge, massive automated piece of set. It could stop at the start of its travel, in the middle, in the end, in the exit, in the entrance. It can stop at any point. So we need to look at where it would stop and what problems it would cause. Now, the wonderful thing about working in ceremonies is quite often we run our shows to time code. So if you have a time-coded show, we can therefore put loops into the show. So we can identify musical points around about the time something could go wrong. And then if that automation piece or whatever it is does have a failure, immediately find out what's going on. If it can be fixed in 2 seconds, we would continue. But if we have a pre-prepared musical loop available, then we will go into that loop. So what that means effectively, you might be hearing the same bit of music repeated over 20 seconds, but the brilliant guys or girls who run the replay and playback systems would have cut it so brilliantly, you wouldn't really know from an audience point of view. So it basically gives us time to be able to fix something. So we could go into a loop for, a minute and 90 seconds. And what it will mean once we're into that loop is that lighting cues, which have already been fired by time code, they will not fire again. So they will keep static. The music will keep looping. If we have performers on the field, they will often have in-ear monitoring from the choreographical team, so they can tell them to keep going or whatever it may be. So it gives us that bit of time to fix a problem. And then, because quite often it might be a quick fix, we're going to restart the pumps, restart the motors, whatever it may be. We get the piece underway. When we know we are good to continue, we come out of the musical loop, and that carries on. That, of course, can cover us for a huge amount of problems. But ultimately, there might be a major issue where we need more time to fix. So what we always have in our back pocket are contingency videos. These might be the makings of the games, the making of the ceremonies, the torch relay, or whatever it may be. So we have maybe 10 or 20 minutes worth of videos we can play in. Broadcast will get these at home. They'll be shown in the stadium, means we can fix a huge problem. Touch wood, I've never had to run a contingency video outside of a dress rehearsal. But I have been into loops in a show, which we can talk about later. But basically, yes, from a ceremony's point of view, we need to look at how we keep the show going, because we cannot stop.
That's a good point. From my perspective, I think it's the exact opposite, because statistically, when you run a show night after night after night, you will have stops. So the way that, and I've worked on probably about 10 years of circus shows. So I calculated actually over a 10-year period, I've dealt with experience, been involved with around 250 show stops over a 10-year period. So I have seen a few, and a lot of the way that you prepare in a resident show is to prepare for the eventuality of that, how it happens. But before I may go into that detail, maybe Matthew can speak about his experience on Broadway, and then I'll go back to the circus thing. That's a very specific preparation. So I think let's get a broader view of a general showstop in a theatrical environment.
Great. So unlike what Gareth was saying, that the supreme pressures not to stop in some form is because millions and millions of people. Usually the pressure not to stop is coming from a producer or a director. We've all kind of come up in theater with that idea of the show must go on, right? However, when you're starting to deal with a lot of effects, not just automation, traps, flying, items like that, the idea of stopping to keep your company safe becomes not something to be feared and not something to approach with trepidation, but something to be embraced as your contingency plan. Like Gareth was saying, in events, having those contingency videos ready, the one contingency in the theater that we need to know how to do is just how to stop safely. And that's the one thing that you can do, probably the most important thing you can do to keep your company safe. Now, I've emphasized safety, but there's really two reasons to ever stop a show. I should say to stop a theatrical show. One, keep your company safe. There's something going wrong on stage technically, or something in the house that's a problem that has to deal with safety. Or two, you can't tell the story anymore. If you have different pieces in and you can't communicate the story to the audience, it doesn't matter that everyone's safe. No one's gonna have any clues what's going on, so it's to your advantage to stop. I'd like to say that if any producer gives you flack about stopping a show, it's better to stop a show than deal with a lawsuit. And I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek to try to, it's kind of a way to lighten it up. It's like, hey, better to have stopped and not needed to stop than needed to stop and not stopped. Usually by stopping a show, you can solve more problems than you ever could by trying to push through. And that comes from years of experience on Spider-Man and Little Mermaid, Wicked, and having all sorts of various issues that we can, as Gareth said, we can get into more specifics a little bit later. But I think the culture of show must go on, is one of the things that we really need to shift. And it's learning how to stop safely, effectively, and efficiently. A 20-second show stop to fix a problem, to keep it going, that's a problem. The audience might not even know you've stopped at that point. But then again, I've done show stops up to like 20 minutes where it's like, all right, we've had to stop. Not a big deal. Let the audience stand up, walk around, get a drink. We'll bring them back when we're ready. It's just another intermission at that point. And in fact, audiences, for the most part, and I'm sure shows that you've all seen out there, they kind of embrace the show stop. And in a way, if it's not too long, the audience gets doubled down into the show because now they feel even more a special part of what's going on. So, I mean, shows like Spider-Man kind of thrived off the idea of people hoping they would see the show actually stop. So that's a little overview of kind of
I never want to see show stuff.
Well,
the reality is with lots of automation, lift won't go up, lift won't go down, winch won't fly. There's 1,000 reasons for show stops to occur in a circus show, and therefore, as I said before, you're always preparing for that. One of the ways that we prepared as a stage management team is we had the main show call script, and then we had contingency calling scripts that would get slotted in. So if we knew that we couldn't use this lift, then we had a version of the show without that lift. If we knew we couldn't use that vomitory that used to go up and down and boats came in and out from that direction because it was an aquatic show, then we would have a contingency plan for that. And sometimes when there was a situation where the lift would stop mid-show, we'd have to take a pause, pull out that prompt script, make sure that everybody is clear with the designated changes, and then we continue the show in that manner. Now, that also comes with a lot of caveats, because you've got to also understand the level and capacity of the crew. Has that lift operator done that version of the show? Has the cast, do we have a new cast in that we've just put 25 new cast members in, and have they ever seen that version of the show? Does everybody understand what's happening as we amend and move forward? And that's always the biggest thing that I always stress to show callers as we were training in the circus environment, is the minute that something goes wrong, the risk exponentially increases. So your job as a stage manager is to make sure that every step you take when you're in that modified or alternate situation is clearly communicated, and that everybody knows what's going on, so that you're not going to hurt anybody. And just in terms of the preparation, I think for me it starts way back into careful artist integration and planning, making sure that everybody understands the beast that they're working in. They have to respect the theatre that they're in, and they also need to understand that if we're throwing out technical terms to them, that they understand what that means in terms of what that means for them and their role within the show. So it becomes a huge endeavour, not just as a singular stage manager controlling the situation, but as a whole team reacting to problems that come and go from the show.
I think there's the process of compiling the contingency planning, the way I do it is definitely obviously teching the show. I'm seeing where the potential snag points would be. And it starts everything from having clearance to start the show late, having late VOP arrival. That can have real impact into show, up into the major automation issues, or sound issues, or lighting desk issues, whatever it may be. So my process, I would do a first pass at document, basically listing every single thing that I think might go wrong. And a lot of that comes from my own knowledge, but I then need the big input of technical, so I will then pass this document to the head of automation, the head of stage, head of lighting, all the departments, so they can have a look at it, and particularly the technical director to them to add their comments. This is where Google Docs come in so useful. So they can add their comments and say, yes, we can do this, we can do that. Automation team can tell you exactly what they can do. Maybe we have a manual option. So then I compile this document with all the knowledge from the tech team. And then the final sort of stage is to then, the next stage is then talk to the creative team. Because ultimately our job as stage managers, show callers, we are there to keep the show looking as it was intended, as close to it can be. So I generally will, where possible, offer solutions for the creative team. If we cannot get this piece of scenic in, do we want to bring the performers in from a different VOM, for example? And I'll present options going, do you want, I did a show a few years ago with a large automated balloon outside, which worked perfectly in the show. But the big question was, if we can't lift that balloon, if we have a winch failure, where do you want to see that performer? I think we can get him out quickly enough to get him to stage for an entrance, or would you rather him come through the audience? So I will present what I think are practical options to the creative team, and they will say, yes, that is our preferred, let's bring him on the audience if we can do it that way. So I've got that knowledge to know, okay, this is ideally my plan A. But when it comes to the show, of course, at that point, I will do whatever is best. But ultimately in my head, I've got the technical information and I've got the creative information to be able to make the best call. And then what we do at the end of probably a couple of days just before we go into show, we'll then have a full contingency meeting, all HODs, all interested parties, just to go through the show in detail, so that everyone is aware of what is happening, and then send the document out to the full team. And the good thing I will always say, whatever you plan for, it doesn't happen. So everything that has gone wrong is extraordinary things that generally you haven't planned for. We can talk about that later. But I think that everyone knowing the document and knowing what's in their head, just from having a conversation about it, means that everyone has got some sort of idea of what you may do in that situation. So it's definitely a collaboration from us, from technical, and of course from creative.
Yeah, having those pre-planned contingency plans are very important, and in some cases in the theater, I think they're also very helpful. For example, in Wicked, end of Act 1, Elphaba's flight, big theatrical effect, big moment in the show, big chance for something to go awry and her not be able to fly. Well, that would be a very, very unfortunate place to stop. So they've built in various light cues and adjustments to do that moment without her flight. So it's like, oh, it's not working. Automation's on. Said, no, we can't get it to work. Okay, everyone, 900 cues. Boom, flip it over, jump right into the 900 cues sequence, and you're off and rolling. My concern with having too many contingency plans is multifold. One, as you said, Gareth, anything that you plan for, anything that can go wrong will. So you can't have multiple contingency plans on top of each other that actually take every little thing into effect. If you're dealing with one adjustment, one change, like Elphaba, the evaluator's not working, that's one variable. But when you have up to 60 different effects, automation moving, traps opening, having all those various contingency plans are actually, I think, more dangerous than just, okay, now we stop. Put a pause in the whole thing, clear everybody, fix it. And we'll get to the details of that, I think, a little bit later. But I didn't want to give the impression that we wouldn't have contingency plans. But I think it's important in key moments here or there, what are those one or two adjustments you can make in those situations. On long-running shows, you know, I've done Little Mermaid and things like that. You get used to making certain adjustments. You're like, oh, okay, this happened. We can make that little adjustment, make that entrance somewhere else. And you're able to make some of those calls on the fly when you're not dealing with a safety issue or not being able to tell the story. Oh, this piece hasn't moved out of the way. Okay, hey, Enrique, just go down, enter in 1 instead of in 2. Okay, boom, done, easy. And like Anna was mentioning with working with the crew, on Broadway, we have a lot of stagehands who sub out. So one day you have, you know, a prop guy who's done the show 100 times. One day you have a prop guy who's done the show 0 times. That very much can happen. And those contingency plans work very well if you've been able to prep them and rehearse them. And when you're doing a large event, you're not subbing out guys. You're not subbing out your crew. You know, they're in it. They're sitting there 16 hours a day, however many days the gig is, right? So I have not having had a chance to rehearse with the crew makes me very nervous going into, hey, everyone, contingency plan number 73B, ready, go. And somebody's going to, 73B, what's that? And then you just get hit in the head with something. So not a good plan to have various versions of contingencies. So
I think that is a very difficult thing to judge, and that often does come back to the person who's calling in the show. Is like is everybody on the same page? And you know, having been involved in the creation of the House of Dancing Water and then run it for 7 years, that evolved greatly over the period of time. You know, I remember one show where just before the Straps Act, a backdrop comes up and there's about 15 people that walk on from the back and they come to the center of the stage. And we couldn't strike a bridge underwater. And one of the lifts that they walk across was down. And so in the early days, I had said to the team, because we spent 2 years of our lives together, we knew each other intimately. We had a strong relationship. We created the show together. They knew the machine as well as I knew the machine. And I said to the stage managers, tell them that N1 is down and to walk across the bunkers, which is to like go around that big gap, because I knew the lift was coming up. It just wasn't going to be there at the time that they were supposed to walk off. So they went out and they did that. And but 3 years down the track, if I could never have asked the cast and crew to do that, because we did not have the same relationship, and they would have walked straight into that pool with people on their shoulders and it would have been carnage. So I had to change and evolve with the people that were around me. And, you know, what I would have liked to have done as the person who created the show then became something that was impossible. So that was also a very interesting evolution to go through.
And I think that's definitely, you know, from a Sherry's point of view, I think from all our point of view, safety is without doubt the top priority. You know, we will, you know, even if you're running the biggest ceremony, if it's not safe, we stop. But ultimately, in a big stadium, the broadcast, you know, we have the option of cutting away, of running BT. So that's our kind of, you know, ultimate thing to do. I also remember from my days in theatre back on Lion King, because that show had been running for so long, there were so many contingencies that we actually, once we did the cast change, every day at warm up, we'd teach the cast a little contingency. If the lifts weren't up for one sequence, you come off from the wings. Matt, I did Wicked as well. I remember that Elphaba thing, we'd just shout in the wings. We're doing a flat floor contingency, and the cast, because they've rehearsed it, they knew what that was.
And that's the key. When you're going to have those contingencies, you have to rehearse them.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. But in ceremonies, we don't have the luxury of extra cast rehearsals. When we're looking at contingency plans, we, particularly with mass cast, we have to look at these points and go, if we went into a musical loop here, is that really going to confuse a performance? And that's where the choreo team will come in and say, no, that's absolutely fine. At this point, they're professional dance. They can repeat counts of 8. It's fine. Or they will say, no, it's going to really confuse us. We need to move. So we talk together to find that suitable point where we could go into a loop to keep the show going. So we can't confuse people, and everyone's got to be absolutely clear of what is going on. And with that, in the moment, you know, although I've made these plans, in that moment, I need that information back from everybody else, from a technical team, automation opera, video, whatever it might be, to tell me what is going on, so I can then make a decision to go forward or not.
Mm.
Yeah, one of the contingencies on Les Miserables, the original, I did Bus and Truck number 3, that we would rehearse often, was a manual turntable. As if anyone remembers the show, it's all built around a big turntable that's moving almost constantly throughout the show. And one of the issues that can come up that is very difficult for us to handle is when the turntable computer would fail. So there's a way to operate it manually, but it feels very different to the company. So every so often we'd say, okay, this understudy rehearsal, we're doing a manual show. So everyone would get used to feeling, oh, it's a little slower start, it's a little quicker stop, the position is not exactly the same. So everyone would get a chance to feel what that's like, and the crew would get to rehearse it as well, because for them it's extremely different. When you have those contingencies, cast and crew need to be up to date on it.
Yeah. There's a question there. It says, could you guys go into from Lizanne, could you guys go into a bit into how to stop shows that you cannot rehearse, for example, corporate events or festival shows that are just a one-time event? I'll just talk, because I think it's not just there's a lot of things even in long-term running shows that come up unrehearsed, and just from a circus perspective, there's just a number of sort of things that we put in place to be able to communicate to the cast so quickly. You know, in the Beatles show, the Cirque du Soleil show that I worked on in Vegas, we had, like Gareth said, loop points in the music that we could hit, because that show was run by time code, and the cast would know immediately that there was an issue because the music would be looping. The other thing we used to run was a lovely audio track that is kind of a Beatles call out to their history, and there would be this voiceover saying number 9, number 9, number 9, and we would play that over the soundtrack, and so the cast could say, okay, number 9, I'm hearing that, so I know something's wrong, what lift is down, what isn't working, and that sort of thing. On the House of Dancing Water, we had a live band, so we would get the band to vamp if there was anything that had gone wrong. And before you stop a show, you do, like Gareth said, you try to overcome some of those situations if you can, so you don't have to stop. And the more that you're able to sort of reboot the automation machine or something without compromising safety, you would do so. So when the music was vamped by the band, the cast would look up to the booth where the show caller was, and we used to have a couple of cue lights, and one was red and one was orange. The green one was for something else, so I could explain that later. But orange was stay on stage, we're trying to fix it, or red was get off stage, we're stopping the show. So we could calmly have the cast leave if they saw the red light, and then we'd ramp the music down, make an announcement and stop. And or we would have the orange one, and they would know, okay, I've got to improvise for a little bit until I hear the music go back on track and the orange light go off, and we can continue. So that's how we used to deal with ad hoc things that would come into the show that we didn't expect, and so that there was a way to communicate. There's 2 acts in the show that the cast completely run themselves, and that they had the Russian swing act and the boat act, and they're never looking at the booth. So that was another thing that we discovered we had to deal with, because how do we stop them if they don't even know to look to the booth? So in that, we did a little bit like the Beatles show. We introduced a high-pitched beep that would go over the music, and then they knew, oh, let's slow down to stop. Now, the reason we did that is because if people are doing acrobatics and they're just about to fly off a swing, to stop the music abruptly could also cause more problems. They could be shocked and then, crash into the water, or they could fall off the swing or something like that. So in those high-level acrobatic acts, we never wanted to scare them wanted to inform them but not scare them in the situation, because otherwise you could compound the issue by having an abrupt stop. So they're the couple of things that we used to do. Gareth, you were going to say something.
I think the also thing to talk about is that obviously it's not just, ceremonies and big West End shows and Broadway. We talk about contingencies. It's running, a very simple corporate conference. It's still really important to have a plan of what's going to go wrong, because even the simplest shows can have issues. And, the most common thing might be you've got, the CEO of a very important company on stage and his mic goes down. And this is the most important sort of, I think the thing with all this we are talking about is that it's about making decisions. And as a team, we are there to, if you are the show caller or lead stage manager, whatever it may be, you have to make a decision to keep things going. And if you have a speaker on stage who's got a mic that's causing feedback, we as a team need to make a decision. And the best contingency you can have is having someone with a microphone, handheld mic, stood by the side of the stage, so you can get on stage quickly and hand that over. Yes, it might feel awkward for a brief second, but actually you've enabled it to carry on. And if a VT suddenly freezes during a show, what are you going to do? When we do training in event companies, we talk about this and kind of go, what is the best option? Is it, do you get the MC back on stage and make an announcement? Do you continue? Do you go on stage and talk to the host? So I think it's important, even if you just have a very small team of you, just to have a quick chat before a show of going, what are we going to do if X, Y, Z happens? If the mics don't work, who's got the standby microphones? If the clicker doesn't work for the presentation, who has got the spare clicker? Because our job is to keep the show going as much as we can before we deem we should stop. So I think it's whatever size show you're doing, it's important to have that conversation. And I generally think about every Q I ever call, I always think about, if this was to go wrong, what do I do? And I think it's fascinating. I'm enjoying hearing you two talk as much as the comments coming. It's great to hear how we all do it. And I remember from, I didn't do it, but Lord of the Rings in London, the West End, I didn't work on it, but I know they had such a hugely massive automated show. I believe they used to play a thunderclap in. So the cast knew, okay, we're going to run this sequence on a flat floor. So it's a good way of communicating. So I think it's definitely about whatever you decide to do, it's working together as a team and communicating those. And I think staying on a long running show, you definitely adapt because new stuff comes up all the time. And generally I find on ceremonies, it's the one thing that we haven't ever thought could ever possibly happen. It's the one thing that comes in surprises.
Yeah, the communication is really, really key. In the events that I've done, there are certain things, as you've talked about, Gareth, that are pretty standard. Backup microphone, backup clicker, and usually with videos, you're running a backup video as well. So it's a pretty standard thing. Say, oh, instead of VTA, switch into VTB, ready, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, switch, and then you're off and running. In theater, we don't have we're not running backups at the same time. I wanted to get into a little bit of detail. I've got a little document here I'm going to try to share with everybody. If you give me a moment just to kind of walk through the process of a show stop. So here we go, coming up. Hopefully you're all seeing this now. There it is. So when I'm doing a show, the first thing is you got to decide, do I need to stop, right? Is there a danger to someone physically? Is there a trap open that needs to be closed? Is someone flying? Is there scenery in the wrong place? Or is there a danger in the front of house? Is there a medical situation, or is someone screaming, or is someone unsafe? Do I need to stop? Okay, once you're in the big chair and you're made the decision, yes, I need to stop. And that doesn't necessarily always come from me as the show caller. That could be coming from someone on the crew telling me, we have this issue, we need to stop. But in the end, I'm the one who has to make the final decision. Once you've decided that, I need to inform people. This is where the communication comes in. If I have a conductor, I'm flashing their cue light, got to get them on the horn, we're going to stop. Tell the crew, okay, we're going to stop. The deck stage managers backstage telling the actors we're going to stop. And if I have to inform the front of house, whether that's I have a radio or sending a text message, let them know we're going to do that. Depending on the situation, you might not have time to easily inform all those people to keep your company safe and actually have to stop. But ideally, you'd be able to give everyone a bit of a heads up. Okay, we're going to stop coming up before this entrance at the end of the song or the next verse, or I'm stopping now. Then you tell everyone we're stopped. The conductor stops the music, and you make an announcement. You got to let the audience know, because they're going to be going, huh? You know, I'm not able to really play a loop of music over and over again, like Gareth was talking about. So make the announcement, which is pretty standard format. I have a version I'll bring up in a moment, but basically let the guys know, due to technical issues, we've had to pause at this time. Please remain in your seats. The show will resume as soon as possible. Right? And now I'm able to just roll that off my tongue because I've had to say it many, many times. But it's
Unless
a good
you're
idea
in
to have
China.
it in advance.
Unless you're in China.
True. yeah. This is an international stage manager webinar. Whatever language that your audience speaks, that's the version of the announcement you want to say.
We had recorded announcements. I don't know Cantonese.
Excellent. So once you've made the announcement, you have to clear the stage safely. Now, the easiest way to do that, if you have a front of house curtain, bring it in. But you don't always have a front curtain. So as a deck stage manager, many times I've walked on stage and just said, all right, company, we're stopping. Just exit in one right. And it's like, what? Huh? Yeah, okay. And they come off stage. So when you're in a stop situation, we're not concerned about seeing stage managers on stage. We're not concerned about announcements. Those protocols go out the window as far as, oh, nobody can see me. I can't be seen. I'm a stage manager. No. Keep your company safe. Job one. Walk out right on stage. Get them off safely. Then it's about fix it. And that's usually involving the crew or whatever technical issue we're having. If it's an illness issue, it's addressing that. If it's a front of house issue, addressing that. But whatever needs to happen quickly and efficiently, that's happening. Meanwhile, as stage managers, we're not necessarily in there fixing it. We're planning how we're going to get the restart done. Or if there's an issue, how we can work around that issue if they don't get it fixed. So stage management is planning up the next start, talking with the conductor. We'll pick up at this bar. We'll get these actors on stage. Okay, keep them in the wings until we're ready. Make sure everyone's okay. Then once we have the fix done, we know what the setup plan is to restart. And flash the conductor, let them know, put their cue light back on, get the actors in place, make the announcement to the audience. Thank you for your patience. We will now resume the performance. Take a moment, take a breath, and go. Now, depending on the nature of the stop, you may or may not want to bring up the house lights. If you anticipate it being short, we like to keep the audience in their seats, keep the house lights out. This way they're not getting up and they're ready to start again when you are on stage. 20 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. If it seems like it's going to be more than that, it might be to your advantage to bring the house lights back up, let people have a break. If you know the crew is saying, yeah, this is a 15-minute fix, okay, great. Let the front of house know we're bringing up the house lights. Thank you, audience, for your patience. If you'd like to step out to the restrooms or take a break, we will let you know before we start. Then you need to make the announcement again, to the audience. We will be resuming soon. Please take your seats and let the ushers get you in. And then it's starting like the top of show again, where you need to let someone from front of house know that you're ready to start. They tell you audience is in, house to half, house out, and then resume. So let's turn this one and give us a little announcement. Does that happen? No, it says toggle the screen share here. Show stop announcement. Here we go. So you'll note, first thing you'll note when you actually see this is that it starts with ladies and gentlemen, which we're actually, most people are phasing out at this point for inclusive reasons, which I totally support, but it is still ingrained in our culture. No, not okay. A little computer issue here, computer not responding. But I'll read it to you out loud and share it when the computer's cooperating. May I have your attention, please? We have to stop tonight or today's performance due to technical issues. Very sorry for the delay. The performance will resume momentarily. Thank you for your patience. Pretty standard boilerplate stuff. You don't want to alarm anyone. You want to keep everyone calm, and again, communicate and inform them.
One thing that I experienced having done announcements in English myself, and also, fortunately, there was a period of time in the first couple of years of the Beatles show, the company manager used to go on stage with a microphone to talk to the audience, especially if there was an extended show stop. So that was always really well received, a human voice explaining the situation, and honesty and transparency. Once we get to China and we can't speak the language, it also could be a cultural difference as well, but a recorded announcement in Vegas and in China is a lot less well received. You know, when you get on the phone and you're on wait, and you suddenly get a recorded voice instead of a real person when you're trying to solve a phone or an internet issue. Yeah, that's the same thing you get in a large audience. So recorded announcements are essential if you can't speak the language, but if there's any opportunity that people can speak for real in real time, you find often that the audience are a lot more sympathetic.
Yeah, there are more than a few stories on Broadway where one of the stars would go out front during a show stop and talk to and or entertain the audience during a show stop. Harry Connick Jr. during Pajama Game, they had a show stop. It's like, okay, I'll go out and talk to them, maybe sing a couple songs.
I have sent the clowns out a few times. You were going to say something, Gareth?
I was going to say, I think the important thing when you're doing all the one-off events in different locations is to find out what the venue policy is for evacuations and stuff. So, you know, I would generally sort of know if we're told to stop for any reason, we cut the power. So not cut power, we'd cut sound, stop video, bring back to house lights or whatever. But it's important to find out what the venue policy is. If you're on a ceremony, the operations team will be the ones who are finding this out from you. But I always want to ask the questions of, what do we do in a show stop? And, we may well have pre-recorded announcements, but my question will always be, okay, but if we're evacuating, I personally do not want to stay, and nor does the sound replay operator when the building is burning around us. So it's, although we make joke of it, we have to fundamentally go, so if we need to evacuate the control room for any reason, who is making those decisions? And quite often, venue does take over. They may have pre-recorded announcements themselves, and very often it's a venue thing. Venue staff will take over. But it's a really important conversation to have. Again, just if it's a very small show, you could be doing a very simple breakout conference in a room somewhere. But it's still important to know that if something goes wrong, if there's a venue issue, there's security or power failure, whatever it may be, who is taking control at that point? Is it venue or is it us? Generally, if we ever need to take, stage manager will make sure cast are off stage, for example, look after them. But again, where are we taking to? Are we taking cast somewhere? Are the venue taking cast? So it's just having those conversations. And I think it's, again, it doesn't matter what size show you're doing or the budget or the size. I think it's still important to have these plans on the simplest show in a phone box in, Edinburgh Fringe Festival up into Olympic Stadium, just so everyone knows. Because how we deal with it is very important. And actually, this is sort of where I always say, as kind of show callers and stuff, this is where we make our money, is when it goes wrong, is how we're dealing with it. Because quite often there may be, or we have to make a call in the moment. And I think it's the important thing is to make a decision. And what you cannot be as a show caller, you know, if you're running a show, if something goes wrong, you should be the first one, you know, as much as possible to notice it's not working, you know, and to say what's happening and to make a call of what we're going to do. Now, if you need to ask technical advice, you ask it, but you're the one talking, communicating, being very calm. Remember one time there was an incident, just in a dress rehearsal, we had to go into a big issue and I was going to contingency videos and the director was going, "You're just so calm." I was like, well, inside I'm probably not, but you have to sound calm when it comes to that point. I've dealt with some...
It's not the being calm, it's the acting calm.
Exactly. Exactly. And I've dealt with a couple of, unfortunately, most of my really good stories I can't talk about because I can't talk about the companies involved. But I've had some major issues go wrong. I've had scenic issues or big automation failures. And literally in that moment of it happening, it felt like it was happening in slow motion. The thoughts that go through your head in a split second of every swear word you've ever heard in every language and going, is this happening? But you have to react to it and calmly. And I remember there was one incident, again, unfortunately, I wish I could talk about it. I've got a great video I could show you, but I can't, of a major piece failing and onto stage, and there was no damage to anyone, everyone was fine. But it could have, Daryl, just saw your comment, I'll come to that in a second. You know, you had to react to it, and then afterwards you felt sick afterwards. You dealt with it, carried on, got to the end of the show, and then afterwards you're a bit like that. Whew. But yes, as Daryl was just posted on the show a few years ago in Dubai, we had horses, and one of my favorite shows I've ever done. We had horses running across water stages, and we had planned with the horse team, if the horse was to fall in the water, where would the ramps be? How would we get them out and stuff? And in a dress rehearsal, a horse did fall into, because they had no riders on, they were literally running across a submerged stage, which we rehearsed time and time again. But in the dress, one horse did fall into an area we didn't think was possible. So immediately they got out and it was all fine. But then that was an immediate conversation with production and with the horse owner to go, what do we need to make this safe? You know, how do we redesign this? At this point, it wasn't about the aesthetic. It's this cannot happen again. So how do we help to make this safe? And so you're always looking at ways to cope with it. But with that instant, even in dress rehearsal, you know, we had divers on standby. We had the horse team, so everyone knew how to react to that situation because the production team had planned it so well. We just need to make adjustments for the next bit. So I think it's very much with contingencies. You've got to communicate, but also you have to look at the worst case scenario of every single moment in your show. And
Absolutely.
if it were to go wrong, and I have presented contingency documents to executive producers and creative directors, and they've gone, this is just the most depressing thing. It's like, it is, but you've got to think in that one automation piece, there could be 6 different points of failure. So we need to discuss this and work out how we get around it. So it is a depressing document, but I do love a good contingency plan.
Because you're a nerd, that's why.
Spreadsheet, absolutely.
I think
the good thing about making those plans is that hopefully it's a complete waste of your time. And that's the best thing that can happen.
Exactly. Well, having said that, you know, we had crazily a motorbike act in the show at the House of Dancing Water. Even though it was a water show, we brought the lifts up dry and people jumped 20 meters in the air on motorbikes. And how people would want to do that, I do not know. But for the entirety of the time that we worked there, we had multiple scenarios of rehearsing how to deal with motorbike accidents. Now, I don't want to say about how many we've had or not had in the show because I'm probably not allowed to talk about that. But for the entirety of the show's run, we not only rehearsed a single motorbike accident and how to respond, we rehearsed a multiple motorbike accident because there were times in the show where they would do like a train of motorbikes. And it was always a potential situation where we could have more than one motorbike accident at one time. So how do we divide teams? How do we How do we service every single person that might be injured if we've got 2 or 3 motorbike accidents at one time? So we nailed a single motorbike accident, and to say that you couldn't have a show that goes for 10 years and not have motorbike accidents, we did experience them. We did, I had my team all pre-hospital trauma life support trained, and so we were able to help the physiotherapy department service and coordinate an evacuation of a person. We developed strong relationships with the casino that we were in, but also the emergency services, so they knew that when we called them, we will have spine boarded the person, we will have prepared them, and we had all of the documentation that they required to get out of the venue. But we were always ready, and fortunately we never had to deal with a multiple scenario. But going back to what Gareth says, you've got to think, okay, if it could happen to one, it could happen to 3 at one time, and how do we service that? And the biggest thing that I find that is important in those situations is a lot of times, before I got involved in circus, you would have the nominated first aid person, and that person would be on duty or that sort of thing, and they would be the person to perhaps help with the situation. I don't believe in that method. I believe in people being allocated certain roles that are actually associated in the show. And for example, our team, we had a group of stage managers. We had 5 backstage and 1 show caller, so 6 running the show. And on their tracks, they would have certain responsibilities to undertake in the event of an emergency. So it was never allocated to a person, because people take holidays, because people go on rotation, because people may be in the office that day. It's allocated to the role that you hold within the show, and therefore people know that, okay, the head carpenter does this, this person goes and gets the emergency bag, this person does this, and anybody who's a key person in the show has their extra emergency responsibilities. And that's how we were always ready and prepared. And then once a month with all of the teams, we would practice those scenarios, and we would change from month to month about what potentially scenario that we would deal with. And then also within the stage management team, once a week after the show, we would even practice radio communication. So we would rotate our roles, and you can never underestimate how, when people are scared, when people have never seen an accident before, when people have never seen a traumatic injury, how they react. So the best way to be better at reacting is to practice it, because you start to remember by rote learning over and over and again. What do I say? How do I say it? What the information do I get? Where do I go? And as you've trained that, it then becomes more of a reflex. When you're scared, the reflexes are there to do the right thing. And I can never, ever express how important that becomes when you've got, we had 125 winches in the air, and you've got 6 moving lifts, 91 cast members, 22 scuba divers in the pool. Danger is there and very real, and being ready for it was of utmost importance to me and the stage management team and the entire crew, actually, and the cast.
Yeah. When I was at Spider-Man, what do we do if something goes wrong? It's what do we do when something goes wrong? Because it was just a question of when it would happen. There was just too many moving parts.
Yeah.
There's a good question about comms failures, and I love talking about comms. I think certainly it's a really good thing to talk about, and certainly from a ceremonies point of view, there's definitely redundancy in systems. Normally the comm systems will have their own separate power supply, and they'll be running on a backup. And then I will always have one of the radio channels on Motorola's program, a show called Backup. So everyone knows if the comm should go down, then everyone will switch to the Motorola show called Backup, which would be a duplex channel. And the basic philosophy of this is that we would continue until it became unsafe to do so. If we're calling a sequence and it became unsafe, touch wood, it's never happened. Comms have always been good, and we switch, and often as a show caller, I will have, even like every day, I will give a backup panel under my desk. So if my panel should go down for any reason, I can literally switch panels and carry on. Or worst case, I'll push the PSM out of the way and grab his panel, we'll go down the line. but it is to have radio communication is definitely your best backup. It's good to test it and make sure all your key players, can hear you in areas. And then, yes, we always said that we will continue until we go, at this point it's becoming unsafe, therefore we need to stop. And I think, as someone said here, you have WhatsApp and phone. I said, yeah, and yes, we had a complete, utter fail. If we lost, which is going to be pretty hard because we're all separate systems, if we lost radios and comms and everything, which I don't think is actually possible. But yes, we would text and phone people to say we're stopping and, let's ramp down the show. But again, that's a really important thing just to check to the comms guys or girls, and what have you got? What is our backup, and how are we going to cope should this go down?
Yeah, if I have a complete comms failure in the theater, it's relatively simple. I can have I myself calling the show, usually from the deck, could just walk out on stage and say, "All right, we've got to stop," and then actors walk off stage and we stop and we fix the problem. That said, that is a bit of a dramatic response to the comms going down, because there sometimes are other options depending where you are in the show. I have done solutions where a deck stage manager would grab the book and go stand wherever the light board operator is, whether it's backstage in the basement or run up to the booth, and that person would call the light cues there, and I can still have my cue lights working for automation and on stage stuff, and you can continue the show that way. But if I have a complete and utter failure and I can't communicate with anyone, job number one, keep people safe. So go on stage, clear the cast out, fix the problem, restart. That whole list that we went through before.
That's
important.
I've done some corporate things and the comms have gone down. So literally I've thrown my comms off and literally gone and stood next to because sound is doing mics. It's fine. The most important thing is performance graphics. We should go and sit next to graphics. Someone's fixing the comms whilst I'm with them to make sure we're keeping the show going. Because at that point, there's absolutely no safety concerns. We just need to keep the show going. So you sort of do whatever you need to do to get it going, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
As far as using WhatsApp or other messaging systems, I don't find that very reliable. You can't quite count on delays or something, and I would never want to call a show like that if safety was an issue. If I'm just doing light cues, okay, they might be a bit delayed, or maybe I can anticipate the call, or if it's a play and it's just slow crossfades, no big deal. Pick up my phone, call the light board up. Hey, dude, I'm calling the show this way. But I would be wary of doing that if any safety was involved.
100%. I would never. Yeah, basically, I think in a big show, if it lost comms, automation would just stop. It wouldn't even attempt to call it at that point, because we know how important that communication is to the split second. So I agree 100% with you on that one.
Yeah. There's a very interesting question here, and I think it's worth touching on. Can you guys share your experience about show cancellations due to injury or death on stage? Now, fortunately, in my life, I have not had to experience anything as dramatic as a fatality. Although we do know in the industry, especially in the circus industry, that has happened. And also, I've cancelled many shows due to technical issues, but I've never had to cancel one in my recollection because of an injury. So fortunately, anyone that's been injured in my experience has been able to be safely taken off the stage, and we're able to continue. However, it has always been a discussion for us if there was perhaps a motorbike accident that happened in our show, which never did, that was completely visible to the audience, and would the audience be affected by that too much, and would it be appropriate for us to continue the show? And that was a conversation that came up a number of times if we felt that that was a thing. So there's always the question of, like, you don't want to pretend, oh well, we just injured a person and now let's continue on with the show. I mean, you have to be considerate of how people are emotionally affected by those things. One thing though, and I think it's really important for people who are in the circus realm, or even if you're not in the circus realm and you end up flying people and that sort of thing, is if there has been an incident, generally OSHA do an investigation on a fatality, and they will release a report that you can actually see. Now, it's not about pointing fingers, it just goes to talk about the circumstances where that accident was, how that occurred and how that happened. And I always tried to find out that information and see if, you know, because if there's ever a major incident or accident in a show, it's generally never one thing. It's an accumulation of circumstances of numerous things coming together to cause that unlikely event. And so, and I want to talk perhaps a little bit about if everyone remembers, there was a fatality in car a number of years ago in Cirque du Soleil in Las Vegas, where unfortunately somebody lost their life. And we don't need to really go into the details of how and why that happened, because I think every situation is unique. But what we did in result of that, you know, we were across the other side of the planet, but I looked into the situation. Okay, one of the feedbacks on the OSHA report was that there was a lack of recorded documentations of performers, certain performers being trained in those roles. And I thought, shit, we don't have an adequate record of, you know, everybody agreeing that this person is ready for this position. How do we deal with that, and how do we protect ourselves in that situation and dot the I's and cross the T's? And you know, we had a long, thorough when we integrated performers into the show, into new positions, into new roles. There was a long and arduous process of doing the training, the show conditions, the validations, and the artistic coordinator said they were ready, the coach said they were ready. If the automation and the stage manager were involved in, if it was a highly technical cue, they might weigh in whether they were ready. But there was never a lot of things on paper. So we actually introduced basically a competency sheet. And what we would do is in a certain cycle of shows, say every 6 months, we would sit down and we would have all of the cues that a cast member would do in the show. So maybe they do 7 things on a day-to-day basis, but they're actually trained for about 35 positions in the show. And they would write down, yes, I acknowledge that I'm trained to do this, I'm qualified to do this, and I'm happy to do these roles. And also the artistic team would also sign it and say, we believe that they are trained, ready, and accurate. And then it became a sequence of recorded documentation, so that if we ever had an incident, we could say, look, we believe, we all agreed as a collective team that we, including the performer, that they were ready and qualified for that role. So I think it's always good to look at situations and learn from other shows, and you never want to wish that upon anybody on any team. But the reality is we do, in some instances, do dangerous shows, and we should take precautions.
I think that's really interesting, and I think when I did a big outdoor show, big secret cinema show many years ago, and it ran very safely, but we had a lot of cars moving at speed amongst the audience. There'd been some great plans put in place to have concrete barriers to make sure this was okay. But one thing we talked about was, you know, if God forbid an audience member was hit by a car, how do we deal with it? And of course, we had medical and ambulance standby. But the conversation I started was, well, we need to look at where it had a big square that held about 4,000 people, if anyone, and it was Back to the Future. You know, they replicated the whole town hill of Hill Valley. And I was saying, well, if, for example, there was a small accident towards the back of the square, you've got most of the audience looking at the show and the film. So I said, like, my thought, I mean, discussed with health and safety, of course, but my feeling we sort of came up with was, unless it's a terrible accident, if it can be dealt with locally, we are better to continue the show, because this way we have 4,000 people who are mostly going to be focused on the stage at this point. So actually stopping it may cause more of an issue. You then got 4,000 people trying to see what happened. Of course, this would be on a case-by-case basis and severity and decision we would make at the time. There was a small localized medical incident. We felt that we can deal with it here. We're not going to have 4,000 people trying to watch or get panicked. And so that was something definitely worth discussing.
Yeah. I mean, that's the real serious part of it, really. So you're going to say something, Matthew?
Yeah, that was really great comments you had there, Anna and Gareth. I wanted to jump back to the top of that about show cancellations, whether due to show stops or other. That's never my call as the stage manager. My job is to try to figure out what we can do, and then it's up to company management or general management, more specifically, to figure out if we're going to cancel the show, because that becomes about money, and it becomes about the producers and how they're going to deal with ticket sales and ticket sellers and buyers and all that mishigas. So I can present, well, we can do the show without this, without that, without this. We'd have to figure out how we do A, B, or C. For example, when we had issues once on Little Mermaid where the entire automation system was out. Well, we were preparing to do a concert version of the show, which other shows have done at different times. And this way, you still do the show, you just do a different version of the show. Fortunately, they finally got that issue solved, but that's the road we were looking at going down. Show cancellations. I've never had to cancel a show, but we have gotten close. And it has happened on Broadway before, but that, Broadway's commercial theater. There's a lot of money going on, and if you play, you don't have to pay. If the show plays in whatever form, you don't have to refund money. You don't have to reissue tickets, and the economic engine keeps going. Of course, our first concern, I think this is the third or fourth time I've said it, is safety. So once you keep everyone safe, whatever version of the show you can put up that night, that's the version you put up.
Yeah, I think in the West End, it's something like if you show, don't quote me, it's something like if you show 70% of the show, then you can continue. And then there's some shows, I shouldn't mention which shows, but I know some big shows I've done, and they didn't have cancellation insurance because it was so expensive. So ultimately, that decision was always taken on high. I think the couple of times we cancelled was due to a huge power outage, and you had no choice, had absolutely no choice at that point. So yeah, it's definitely never our call. I think my job certainly is I keep going with the show as long as it's safe until someone else tells me, no, you need to stop at this point. So definitely, yeah, that's a costly decision that is way above my pay grade to make about cancelling a show. Stopping a show, nobody will blame you for stopping the show because it's about making decisions. But yes, it would definitely not for me to say we're going to cancel.
Very early on. Very early on, just a quick side joke. Very early on at the House of Dancing Water, I was asked if we could do a show without water, and
the House of Dancing.
Yeah, and, I didn't know what to say actually. The answer was actually no, but yeah.
I actually did a show through a fire alarm once. It was a corporate event, and a fire alarm went off in the ballroom. And the presenter on stage kind of looked at me like, I don't know what to do. I mean, not a trained actor, just an executive talking. And I got on the Voice of God mic and was like, we're looking into it. It's not an issue at this time. Please continue. And then I'm like, turned to my producers like, find out what's going on. Get that alarm off. 9 times out of 10, those alarms in the ballroom are not an issue. But you have to find out if it is an issue. You want to clear the venue and keep everyone safe. But until I know it's an issue, I'm just like, not a problem, very calm, just please continue. We just get
literally my favorite show stop and a fire alarm story was at the Beatles show in Las Vegas, and we were doing the rollerblade act. I don't know if anyone's seen the show. And the fire alarm went off, and in that casino, everything would stop, the music would stop, and the lights would come up. And unfortunately, somebody in the casino decided that there wasn't a show that night in our theatre and turned the sprinkler system on. So I have never seen 2,000 people evacuate a theatre in less than 5 minutes, except for that day where everybody was getting entirely wet, and that was a day.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, that was a cancellation of the show.
My favorite alarm story was in a regional theater down at La Jolla Playhouse. We were doing Therese Raquin, Michael Greif directing, and it was starred Paul Giamatti. And it was in Act 2 when Paul Giamatti's character is the husband who his wife and her lover kill him, and then they continue their affair. Well, in this scene, Paul is hiding in a cutout in their bed, and the wife and the lover are having some kind of an argument. Fire alarm goes off, and so the stage manager says, "Okay, we need to clear the theater." Makes the announcement. The audience starts clearing. The 2 actors on stage leave, and Paul is still in the bed. Now, this is a thrust stage, so we can't bring in a curtain. And the deck stage managers were talking like, "What do you do about Paul? What do you do, Paul? We got to figure it out." Now, while we're trying to figure out what to do, Paul just says, "Okay, I'm getting up." And so while the audience is clearing, he just sits up in the bed and the audience all see him and go, the gasp, oh my goodness, wow. And then we get him and walk him off the stage. So we've kind of blew the whole reveal where he starts haunting them. So we figure out the fire alarm thing, get it turned off, get Paul back in the bed, get the audience seated, and then we resume the show where everyone in the audience knows what the big jig is already. They're like, oh well, sorry.
Oh, well,
But
now you know the
suspension
secret.
of disbelief was in full effect.
Well asks, he's called some circus shows, and he unfortunately was involved where a performer fell for the wheel of death. And he says, do I have any special announcements that you need to do after an accident's happened, or maybe the ringmaster, main cast, maybe say something regarding the accident? We had standard. It's difficult because when we were in a predominantly Chinese environment, so we had standard recorded announcements, and one of them did say that we'd had an incident and it had been resolved. But unfortunately, we couldn't often speak personally to the audience to say, hey, this is what's happening. But I think, again, it comes back to, if you've got the opportunity and you're in an environment where you can speak to people, it's very good to have that representative to come on stage and say, look, the person is okay. We feel happy to continue the show. Please enjoy and be assured that that person is being well taken care of, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, if it is a more serious incident, then you've got to have that decision to say, hey, maybe it's not appropriate to continue the show. And that's always a difficult thing because as Gareth and Matthew have sort of ascertained, sometimes that a lot of the time that may not be your call. There's going to be corporate, figureheads who are responsible for the monetary aspect of the show that may make that call for you, and that can at times be a conflict of interest. Now, I've fortunately been in a situation where, when it comes to an artistic or technical possibility for continuing a show from a safety perspective, I've always had the influence to say, no, this is not happening if I don't believe we can continue. But in other cases, whether it's an artistically compromised show and I don't agree, I don't get that call. When it's something that they want to finish the show and they believe that it's okay because somebody's been injured and we continue the show, maybe I don't get that call. And that's why you have to concede that you have your place and some things are outside your jurisdiction, and respect that.
I'd agree. Hi, Weller, by the way. I agree. There's certain shows I've done where it's been outdoor shows and where there's been a big issue, been torrential rain, and the producers want to continue financial reasons. We are hearing that we shouldn't do stuff, but what we do together, and actually is quite enjoyable, we work out how can we deliver the best show for the public and that keeps it safe, and what are we going to. And this also may become part of the contingency planning. And certainly when we did Back to the Future outside, we definitely, over the few weeks we did the show, we had a wet weather show. And really for that was we cut down a lot of the fast car movements, anything on stage we put onto the main floor, and had basically a slower version of the show. We worked through the health and safety team so we could still deliver a show. And we even did one show where the weather was absolutely terrible. We thought nobody would turn up. They did, and they absolutely loved it. Even we delivered perhaps half the show that we would have delivered, but they had no idea what the original was. So again, that was part of good contingency plan, that we had this second version of the show. But as stage management team, we did have we developed that to make it into a good show. And and we walked around the site with producers going, in this instance, we can do this, we can do that. So I think it still becomes a team, and our job is still to, like I said, it's not our call, but we can advise. And certainly I think our stop thing is to say, well, this would not be safe in this condition, but we can do X, Y, and Z. And again, we keep repeating 1,000 times, but I think it's worth it. It all comes down to what is safe. And I think the most important thing, just I thought of talking about theatre, is that whatever situation you're in, the most important rule is that you can never ask a performer to do something that they're not comfortable with if something's changing. And it doesn't matter how insignificant it might seem to you, you can't do. I'll give you a very simple example. We did Sister Act in town a long time ago. We had a big automated bridge that came into mid-stage. And when it landed about 8 foot off the deck, it had some lugs it locked into just to stop it swinging. Now, one of those broke off during the show. It just meant the bridge had a bit of swinging. It didn't support any of its weight. It was literally a guide. So it was still 100% safe to be on. And I remember I was tech ASM at the time and was with some of the nuns about to run across. And one of them said to me, I don't feel very safe doing it. I said, look, I'm not going to make you. I would happily run on it because I know it's safe. She said, okay, fine. So if you are good with that, then that's absolutely fine. So that's what's important to remember, to make sure that nobody does anything that they feel uncomfortable doing.
You're kind of touching on those emotional issues. The technical issues are pretty black and white and pretty easy to handle once you understand what the A, B's, and C's are. The emotional issues are the harder ones.
There you go, Gareth. Are you there, Matthew? You got to turn your mic on, Gareth, I think. Are you there?
I am, yes.
I think we just lost Matthew. He was saying that the emotional issues are something that you have to deal with, and I think that's when you've got a big cast and a big crew, then you've really got to deal with that and make sure that everybody's happy with the decisions that you're making. It's super important. I can't hear you, Gareth.
Hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Technical issue, sorry. I think it's really important, any show that's running more than once, is to address an issue the next day with the company. Even if something was happened absolutely fine, there was no incident, but if there was a big change, I think it's really important to just take those moments with the company to explain what happened and said, last night X happened because of X, Y, Z, and we put in place this new check to make sure it can't happen again. And I think it's really important, and it's a rule that I was taught in theatre many years ago, and it's a rule I've always lived by in anything that I do, is that you get to them before they get to you. Not in a horrible way, but if something's gone wrong to a performer, as simple as you haven't set a prop properly, you acknowledge that, and you go to that performer and you say, really sorry, that was a mistake. And it just calms any situation, but it shows a performer that you've acknowledged that. And of course, if it could be a bigger technical issue, it's really important. If their microphone went down, just go and have a quick chat and go, we're really sorry about that. I'm sure it's a problem, and just did a big conference a few months ago in Shanghai. And there's a very sudden quick turnaround of presenters, and someone else came on instead. And we caught up as best we could, but the first presentation was a bit ropey for the speaker. And so I just said to the stage manager, can you just go and apologize, explain the situation? And she was like, of course, no problem with the change. Not at all. Thank you for coming and explaining to me. It's that communication in any situation, just to make sure you've acknowledged there was a problem. And that really helps with that relationship and trust, for sure.
Yeah, we often did that.
We touched on that.
Sorry.
We touched on that a bit yesterday about the soft skills and the personal interaction. And the technical things about stopping, anyone can teach or learn, but those soft skills about how to communicate with actors and stagehands, how to take care of them and help them when they're feeling concerned or nervous. We had issues on Little Mermaid where we kept trying to push through early in the run when we have technical issues, and the performers started not feeling safe. So we told the actors, if you don't feel safe, you are okay to leave the stage. If you feel like you are in danger or not comfortable, leave the stage. No one's going to fault you for it. And sometimes that would happen. Them knowing that we support them and are looking out for them is so important. And that became one of the reasons that we stopped trying to find creative ways to push through technical challenges and just stop. There's an issue, stop. That's it. No more trying to guess. Let's do the safe thing, because that culture of, as I start off with, of trying to keep the show going, push through it, we can do this, we can figure it out, isn't always the best approach, and it's definitely not when people's safety are at risk.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say that. Yes, send you back. I was going to say, often when you're flying people, there's a number of factors that people have to trust the people around them. Obviously, they've got harnesses, they've got acrobatic equipment, they've got riggers who are hooking them up. You've got automation people who are pushing the buttons and flying them out over, 17 or 30, 35 feet in the air, and you've got a show caller who's calling the cues that all affect you and your movement and your performance. And so that trust has got to be very, very strong. And there were times where the performers would come off a winch or something and say, I felt a shudder and something doesn't feel right. Now, I know that the automation team had checked all the systems and they're fine and there's nothing wrong with it. But it was protocol for the team to, if an artist commented on the feel of the equipment, no matter how small or large that comment was, that the protocol was to do a full inspection before the next show. Now, that's not a small, request for somebody to do. When an automation team has to inspect a winch in between shows, that means about 2 or 3 people don't get a dinner break. But that was the protocol, and also it made the cast member, and we would make a point of doing that winch inspection, verifying that it's okay, and then going back to the performer before the second show to say, you know what, we've done a thorough check, top to bottom, it's all good, don't worry, but give us some feedback after the next show. So that's always very reassuring for people who are flying on winches day to day. And hell, I would not want to go out over that over that kind of distance that fly every day without a huge amount of trust of the people that are there. And that maintaining that takes time. You run a show for a long period of time. You cannot get complacent. You cannot think that it's just going to go in, day in and day out. That's where the work happens for a lot of the technical crews for the shows, is to make sure that nothing gets compromised at any point, and that the cast maintain that trust in you day in and day out.
And trust is a lot harder to rebuild than any piece of scenery.
Oh, yes.
I do know of an incident, I'm not going to mention the show, in several years ago. I do know somebody was not, I know sort of firsthand, where there was a performer who was flying, and they were it's a theatre show, and they'd come off and said, this doesn't feel right, and the stage management person was absolutely fine, don't worry about it. It's like, well, that's not our job. You need to take that on board, and certainly as a stage manager, you are not responsible for automation, so you are not the person to be able to say it's absolutely fine. So our job is to go, absolutely, thanks, Tanya, get some more information and pass on to the relevant team, because that trust is so important. The cast, it doesn't matter if you have 10,000 cast or 10 cast, so they can come to you as stage management and know that if they have a concern, you're going to listen to them, and particularly if they're putting their lives at risk by flying in the air, it's so important we listen and understand, and then pass those concerns on.
Absolutely. Anne has asked an impossible question, I think. Do you have documents that define the stage manager role with their responsibilities? I couldn't. I think it's a conversation to have with the company. I'd like to hear from Gareth and Matthew on their thoughts on that. Having worked internationally, and we spoke a little bit about yesterday. Every place has a different perception on what we do. And people who us as individuals also have a perception about what we do, and often I will go in and have a conversation or try to identify what people's expectations of me in any given role that I undertake, from country to country or location to location, and then try to fill those holes. And if I feel like that's outside my jurisdiction, or there's more I should get paid for if I'm taking on higher responsibility, or if it's an easier job, then we have that dialogue. But stage management is one of the greyest job descriptions in the world, I think. What do you guys think?
I teach at SUNY Purchase stage management, and in a BFA and a BA program. And my first lecture, pretty much for about over an hour, we discuss what the definition of stage manager is. So there's nothing easy about it. There are books that have some really good information on it that define the role of stage manager in different ways. There's your peers that you're working with, they'll have their own idea. The director or producers will have their own idea about what your job is. The producers will have their own idea about what your job is. And as Anna said, you'll come with your own expectations about what your job and what your role is. There are certain standards on a Broadway show. We know what that box that we live in most events. We know what our roles and responsibilities are. However, even in those industries, it varies from place to place and from person to person that you're working for and working with. So as Anna said, having that conversation, like if I'm doing a new show with a new director, I want to have the conversation with them, roles, expectations, likes, preferences, so that you as a stage manager can be flexible enough to adjust to whatever you need to be for that person for that show, which I think also dovetails on what Anna ended up with as well. But it's not easy to define. If you aren't, I think, like you said, you're in a small local theater, you can write up your own definition. I would encourage you to do some research online, get some of these books, and find out, okay, and write that up. If you want me to send you my definition, I can do that too. But remember, that's just a starting point. And our job encompasses so much more than anyone ever really thinks. We do everything from being the cruise director on the show, to being a nurse, to being an HR representative, to being people's accountants, to being the police officer, the fireman. We do everything. So it's we could do a whole nother webinar just on defining the role of stage manager.
Yeah, we could, and just briefly, the difference between West End and Broadway practices are huge. Because Broadway is so unionized. We in West End theatre, or any UK theatre, we very much have a policy. Everyone just mucks in and gets it done. Stage manager set the props, whatever's needed doing, we do. But I know Broadway, the props department have to set the props, and the stage manager, you can't change them. So I know I've had stage manager friends from London who've gone over to Broadway to learn a show that's transferring, and they've been like, well, what do I can't touch, I can't do anything because what am I supposed to do? I can't even touch a prop, and which is really alien to us, because we do that, we pick it up, it's broke, oh, prop's broken, oh, I'll fix it and do that, because we don't, although we have props buyers on shows, everything outside of London, most sort of non-commercial shows, ASMs are the ones who prop the show anyway. We learn how to prop shows in drama schools here. But even when you get to the big commercial touring and West End, with the exception of, I know Lion King, the carps look after or mechs you call them, look after the props. That's quite unique. Generally, every other show, Sister Act, Wicked, all that kind of stuff, we look after the props ourselves. We fix them, we look after the maintenance. So those are huge. It is, like I said, it's a whole nother topic to talk about the differences around the world. And then obviously what a stage manager does in ceremonies can be very different. But I think the nuts and bolts of what we do is the same. It's like I say, we're calling a show. We all say standby, we all say go. It's just different scales. But I think it's certainly perhaps another topic to talk about at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Caitlin asks, is there an outline for that? I think Gareth and I have tried to talk about trying to define that, and every time I talk to different people around the world, I get more and more confused. But it is something that we could probably try and hash out together at some point and see if we can put a definition around it. At least, like Matthew says, a framework of what to expect, because I think that is the biggest thing to, when Cirque du Soleil works completely different in any other method than any other sort of theatrical environment, and I actually like the challenge of coming into something new and not knowing where I fit in and figure out the holes. And I call myself a gap filler a lot of the time in any different project, even when I'm being a producer. The unique thing about stage management is we touch on all of the artistic team, we touch on all of the technical team, and we liaise with all of the upper management. So we tend to be a lovely conduit to understanding everybody's requirements and needs to deliver a show. And therefore, we then start to become the person that really tries to pull that together, because we have that macro view of what everybody needs. And I think that's what's so fun about the job, is as you go from place to place, that you learn more and more and more, and then you get better and better at seeing the problems and pulling them apart and getting them fixed. So where are you guys still there? I hear somebody singing. That in the background, are you, Matthew?
Yeah, that's here.
That's it. It's your son. So we've just hit an hour and a half. What do you guys think? Is there anybody else that got any other questions before we leave? Any final closing?
Roseanne had a follow-up there to the question about defining stage management. How do you deal with unrealistic expectations?
Oh, where's that one? I didn't see that.
Yeah, just a little bit. Unrealistic expectations that often happen in smaller shows, things like that. That's a real challenge. That kind of opens the door to the whole work-life balance issue and taking on too much and overburdening ourselves. Because as a gap filler, as Anna said, you could wind up being a lot of gaps and having to fill a whole lot of stuff that is unrealistic. And that's a question of having those conversations. And in the end, if to serve the show best, if you're being asked to do too much, you need to be able to tell the producer director that this is not realistic. So those conversations are sometimes very difficult. And I've actually been in a situation where I felt like I was doing too much and not succeeding at any of the tasks that I was being asked to do. And that's when you got to look outside the box and try to present solutions or answers. And if there's economic reasons that you don't have the help or support or being asked to do too much, that's a slightly different conversation, as opposed to just informing them that this isn't working great, let's try to find another way to do it. Instead of trying to take on everything and be a martyr, try to find what the solutions are that would make it better and present those to the decision makers to try to find a creative solution.
Yeah,
I think just looking at Brandon's question about advice for beginning to correct documents, the best way is to go through your show in detail. Start at the first thing I do is clearance. Is there a delay for clearance? Then go through each scene or segment of the show. What can cause us a problem in the show? Is there a potential automation problem? Is there a setting issue? Is there a costume quick change that may not happen in time? And then go through every scene, listing those. I would list the problem first. Then I would then think about, next column would be, okay, what is the problem that's going to cause? If that person doesn't make that costume change, what's going to happen? They're not going to make it on stage. How do we cover with that? How do we minimize the risk? To literally going through point by point. And it's really anything that can grind your show to a halt or can adversely affect the creative of the show. And then write it point by point, scene by scene. At the end, I'd sort of do more general stuff. So the last segment, all my contingency plans will be if we lose the screens, if we have comms failures, which we discussed about, if we lose the sound, if we have a power failure, or sort of venue evacuations. So scene by scene, cue by cue, work through your book, and that will really inform you of everything that you think could be a problem.
And my general rule on any paperwork is just make it clear. You can make a chart, you can make a list, you can write it out in paragraphs. Start doing it, and you'll realize how do I make this clear, and then you can judge it, make it better, share it, say, hey, I'm working on this to my automation person. Is this clear to you? Or get to the actors, is this clear to you? And that's because everyone's gonna have a slightly different perception. I don't think there's just one template that you could share and say, this is how you do it. I don't like to approach any paperwork like that, because every show is a little bit different.
But if you also, going back to the unrealistic expectations, I have in the past taken on too much, and a lot of the time, as Gareth and Matthew will attest to, a lot of people don't see or understand what you might be putting your arms around within the show. And there's been a point where I've listed all of the things that I'm actually physically doing for a show or a production, and then going to the producer or the director or the artistic director and having that discussion. Hey, you really wanted me to take care of all of these things? Is this what your expectation of my role is? And so once you put it on paper, I mean, I'm a list person. If you put it all down and you realize, and also also for yourself to say, is that how much I should be taking responsibility? And if you are ending up managing cast and you're writing schedules, and you might, sometimes will easily slip into company management, a company management role, especially if there's somebody in a company management situation that isn't experienced or isn't seeing the gaps, so you're automatically filling them. Perhaps you're doing more of the technical communication because the technical director isn't around. There's many organic ways that you end up filling, like a little octopus, these little the arteries, and it is an opportunity when you put a list down to say, okay, should that be my responsibility? Because also the danger in that, if you do own some of that stuff, then it becomes your liability, right? So you also have to make sure that you're not taking on too much in terms of responsibility and liability in a show. So that's definitely something to have a conversation with the people that are technically your superior to say, okay, is this the job that you see me doing? And let's make sure that we're all on the same page and I know what my responsibilities are. Yeah.
Cool.
So
well, I think before we sign off, can I do my plug just for those who are interested in more types of conversations like this? Anna was able to join us last year at the Broadway Stage Management Symposium coming up on May 30th and 31st. So the link, BroadwaySymposium.com, please check it out. Hope some of you can join us. And I look forward to doing more of this with you guys as well. This is fun.
Yes, and it's also available online as well as live, so you don't have to actually go to New York. If you want to see it online, you can watch it. And Gareth, you can contact. We've put our Instagrams and also our emails, so if you have further questions, let us know. I would really, really, really love to get any feedback on what other topics you would like, and other time zones. I know you guys are... it's 2:36 in the morning in Australian time right now. So if there's better times for you, we'd like to explore those and topics. And the next time we're looking to speak between the three of us is between February 18 and 21, and we'll be advertising those dates and topics very soon. So please give us some feedback and tell us what you want to talk about. And we'll also in the future be getting other guests and stuff involved when we feel like we don't have the knowledge. We'll bring in some experts as well on other topics. So looking forward to speaking to you again. Anything else you want to say, guys?
No, all good. Thanks for joining us.
It's awesome. Yeah. Rock and roll. Go stop shows safely.
Yeah. Have fun. Bye.
All right. Now I have to click the stop and done. End event. Yes.